How old are you today?
3.
And what is your name?
Bubu.
And where do you live?
In Nebraska.
Who's your mommy?
Sonia.
Who's your daddy?
Daddy. Popo.
Who's your sister?
Cassie.
That was 8 years ago. Looking at Colton now, you would have never guessed that he almost died in 2003. His father, Todd, tells about Colton's near-death experience in the book, Heaven is for Real.
And he started throwing up into the toilet, you know, and at first we're like, okay, he's got the stomach flu, because the doctor said it was going around.
Colton's condition only got worse as days passed. His doctor discovered his appendix had burst. An infection was spreading in his body. Time was running out.
And we knew we were in bad shape when they said, well, you need to come out to the hallway. They separated us from everyone else, and then someone came to us and started talking to us that we got to have surgery on your kid.
It was tough. Seeing your boy be lifeless when he was a very vibrant child.
And it was at that moment that we were looking at each other. I remember my wife holding Colton in that hallway, just us. He's not even moving. We went to the surgery prep area, and I remember them hauling him away and him just yelling at me, Daddy, don't let him take me. Daddy, don't let him take me. And I went back to the pre-op room where we had left some stuff, and I was finally alone, shut the door, and I just broke down and I was mad at God. I just frustrated, fed up. And I remember telling him, I said, God, after all I've done for you, and now you're going to take my kid? This is how you treat your pastors?
And I was calling our prayer chain. I was calling anybody that would be on the other line to get Colton on the prayer chain because it was bad.
We were there in the waiting room for an hour and a half, maybe. Then I remember the nurse coming out. Is Colton's daddy out here? I'm like, yeah, well, Colton's in recovery and he's screaming for you. And I'm sitting there with him. And I remember my son in that room then looking up at me and goes, Dad, do you know I almost died? And my first thought was, maybe he overheard the nurse say that, or maybe they thought he was under anesthesia, you know, and he wasn't. But it wasn't till 4 months after we got out of the hospital that we finally listened to our son.
And that's where I got to see heaven. No, Jesus and some angels came and flew me up to heaven.
And I said, so Colton, what did Jesus look like?
I knew that the first person I saw was Jesus. He was wearing white robes with a purple sash, and he just came down nicely and gracefully.
Well, Dad, Jesus has markers. Dad, Jesus has markers. I didn't know what he meant, so I finally asked the right question. Colton, where are Jesus' markers? And he drops his toys down, and he stands up, and he just points, Dad, they were right here. He takes his fingers, points to the palms, then he bends over and touches the tops of his feet. And looks up to me, and that's where Jesus' markers were, Dad.
When I was in the throne room of God to start with, so I got to see what that looked like. I was upset because I didn't know what was happening. What God did is he used people or things that I liked to calm me down. From there on, I felt better.
And one day we're traveling together, and he looks up at me and, Dad, you used to have a grandpa named Pop, didn't you? I'm like, yeah, he's really nice. Really? Yeah, you used to play with him as a kid and work with him on the farm and shoot stuff with him. And I'm like, yeah, how do you know that? Well, he told me.
A figure came up, and he was Pop. He asked me, are you Todd's son? I said, yes. He said that he was his grandpa, so that's where I met him.
Yeah, Pop, I was very close to him. And he was my most significant male role model when I was a kid growing up. But he was killed in a car wreck before I turned 7.
I was busy paying bills again, because that's my job. And he came up and told me he had 2 sisters. Well, he had to say it several times before he finally got my attention. And finally, I put my stuff down and looked at him and says, what do you mean you have 2 sisters? No, I have 2 sisters. You had a baby die in your tummy. And I just looked at him like, well, how do you know you have 2 sisters? Well, she told me. And then he proceeded to describe her.
She looked like Cassie, but she had brown hair. And first time when she saw me, she just came up and hugged me.
We knew this was true because he said, she kept hugging me. She wouldn't stop hugging me, Mom, and I didn't like that.
Well, I'm not really the hugging type.
I had miscarried the weekend of Father's Day weekend, which made it even rougher. And we thought we'd dealt with it. We'd gotten over it, accepted that the baby had died. But when he said he had 2 sisters, I think I was in shock first and then trying to realize, what is he telling me? And so I knew that he had seen her, and after he described her, and he said, she's just waiting for you guys to come to heaven.
You know, as we talked about heaven, and he was telling me all these wonderful details, I just felt like I had to ask him, did he want to come back?
I knew that I was leaving heaven because Jesus came to me and said, Colton, you need to go back. Even though I didn't want to go back, he said that he was answering my dad's prayer.
I remember that prayer. That irreverent, that disrespectful, screaming at God prayer. I was like, he's answering that prayer?
Today, Colton is a healthy 11-year-old and shares his heavenly journey with boldness.
I learned that heaven is for real, and you're going to like it.
You know, I think for a lot of people it's difficult to understand how he experienced so much in such a short period of time. How long was he on the operating table?
I think, I don't know operating wise, but we were like in waiting room for like an hour, hour and a half. And so between, you know, getting him sedated and then having the surgery and then pulling him out of sedation, but we were in the waiting room about an hour and a half.
Did it feel like you were there longer? Did you experience more than just an hour?
When my dad asked how long I was up in heaven, for some weird reason I said 3 minutes when I got to see the past when my dad played with Pop, the present where I got to see my dad preach, and them and my dad in his separate room giving his little prayer to God, and then the future, which is when the Armageddon is to happen.
Let's talk about that for a second. Did you realize that you were seeing, and tell me what you learned about Armageddon or about this battle?
Well, the battle was with Jesus, the angels, and the good people going against Satan, the monsters, and the bad people. They were fighting, and in the end, Jesus does win, and the Armageddon would be over, but it has a long time to do.
Did you talk about this, or did you see it happening? And did you see your dad fighting?
Yes, I got to see it happening, and I got to see my dad in the battle.
Did you understand what was going on, or was it just like a movie?
I understood what was going on because, well, I was up there for a while, so you figure out what's going on after a while.
Heaven is for Real is the true story of the 4-year-old son of a small-town Nebraska pastor who during emergency surgery slips from consciousness and enters heaven. He survives, and young Colton begins to share how he met his miscarried sister, whom no one had told him about.
And she comes up and gives me a big hug and tells me she's my sister, and then she explains what happened.
Colton continued to describe the horse that only Jesus could ride and how the Holy Spirit sends power from heaven to help us. Heaven is for real is told by the father, Todd Burpo, but often in Colton's own words. The message is simple: heaven is a real place. Jesus really loves children, and be ready, there is a coming last battle.